When the foreclosure auctioneer slammed his gavel down and sold my husband as sacred family home to a complete stranger, the look on Mark's face wasn't just shock, it was the pure, unfiltered devastation of a man watching his entire false reality crumble. He turned to me in the middle of the crowded courthouse, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "You promised you handled the payments. You promised." I didn't whisper back. I didn't cry. I simply adjusted my coat, looked him dead in the eye, and said loud enough for his mother to hear, "I promised to pay for our life, Mark. I never promised to subsidize a shrine to a woman who has been dead for 5 years." As the security guard stepped in to stop his mother from lunging at me, I knew the 3 years of psychological torture I'd endured were finally, permanently over. To understand why I let my husband lose the only thing he actually loved, you have to understand that in my marriage, there were always 3 people: me, Mark, and the ghost of his late wife, Elena. I met Mark 2 years after Elena passed away. He was the tragic, brooding widower, handsome, soft-spoken, and seemingly in desperate need of love. I fell for the healer trap. I thought I could be the one to bring the light back into his eyes. When he proposed after 11 months, he told me I was the only person who made him feel alive again. It was a beautiful lie, and I swallowed it whole. The red flags were there from the beginning, but I painted them white. On our wedding day, his mother, desperate for drama, mentioned in her toast that nobody could ever replace the angel we lost, but Sarah is a sturdy companion for Mark, sturdy, like a walking stick or a pair of winter boots. I let it slide. I was a successful corporate attorney, making mid-6 figures. Mark was a freelance art consultant, which I quickly learned was code for unemployed visionary. I didn't mind supporting us. I loved him. I wanted to build a life. The problem was, Mark didn't want to build a new life. He wanted to fund a memorial for his old one. We moved into the house he had shared with Elena. It was a sprawling Victorian estate that cost a fortune to heat and twice that to maintain. I suggested we sell it and buy something fresh, something ours. Mark looked at me like I had suggested burning down a church. "This is Elena's legacy," he said. "Her art studio is here. Her garden is here. I can't leave her behind." So, I compromised. I paid the mortgage. I paid the utilities. I paid for the landscaping to keep her garden blooming. I told myself it was grief. I told myself he just needed time. But the shrine behavior didn't stop. It escalated. The entire 3rd floor was off limits. It was Elena's art studio, left exactly as it was the day she died. Her half-finished canvases were gathering dust, her brushes dried out in jars. Mark would spend hours up there, communing with her memory. Meanwhile, I was downstairs working 70-hour weeks to pay for the roof repair because the dampness was threatening her precious paintings. The dynamic shifted from grief to cruelty about a year into the marriage. It started with small comparisons. If I cooked a roast, Mark would sigh and say, "Elena used a different blend of herbs. Hers was lighter." If I wore a red dress, he'd comment, "Red was Elena's color. It feels disrespectful for you to wear it in her house." I stopped wearing red. I stopped cooking roasts. I started shrinking, making myself smaller to fit into the empty spaces Elena had left behind. The breaking point began on a Tuesday evening, 3 months ago. We were at a dinner party with his family, his mother, his sister, and a few of their old family friends. The conversation, as always, revolved around the golden era when Elena was alive. They told stories about her charity work, her beauty, her talent. I sat there sipping my wine, invisible. Then, Mark's mother turned to me. "Sarah, Mark tells us you're up for a partnership at your firm. That comes with a significant bonus, doesn't it?" I nodded cautiously. "It does. It's been a lot of work." "Wonderful," she beamed. "Mark and I were talking. The foundation on the house is cracking, and the damp is getting into the studio. We need to do a full structural renovation to preserve Elena's work. Your bonus should cover the estimate perfectly." I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "My bonus?" Mark placed his hand over mine, smiling that sad, manipulative smile. Honey, it's necessary. If we don't fix the foundation, we lose the studio. We lose her history. I know you want to help. I was planning to use that bonus to pay off my student loans, I said quietly. Or maybe put a down payment on a vacation home. For us, the table went silent. Mark pulled his hand away as if I burned him. A vacation home, he scoffed. You're thinking about vacations when my late wife's legacy is rotting? She's not your late wife anymore, Mark, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I am your wife. I am the one paying the mortgage on this house. I am the one buying the groceries. Why does my money always have to go to the past? Mark's face darkened. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. Because she was a better person than you. She was an artist. She had a soul. You're just a paycheck. You're the sturdy bank account that keeps the lights on. Don't ever confuse your utility with her value. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked around the table. His mother was smirking. His sister looked down at her plate, hiding a smile. They knew. They all knew. I wasn't the wife. I was the sponsor. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I stood up, placed my napkin over my plate and said, I have a headache. I'll take a taxi home. Mark didn't follow me. He didn't come home until 3 o'clock am, smelling of whiskey. That night, I lay in the guest room because I had been banished from the master bedroom for my insolence, and I stared at the ceiling. The tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, mathematical clarity washed over me. Mark was right. I was a lawyer. I was practical. I was good with details. And if I was just a business partner to him, then it was time to audit the books. The next morning, I didn't mention the fight. I made coffee. I kissed him on the cheek. I went to work. But instead of working on my cases, I called a forensic accountant and a private investigator. I wanted to see exactly where every cent I had deposited into our joint account had gone for the last 3 years. The report I got back 2 weeks later was nauseating. It wasn't just the house maintenance. Mark had been funneling my money into a private account under his mother's name. They were using my salary to pay for his sister's rent, his mother's car payments, and worst of all, they had purchased a plot of land in the cemetery next to Elena. A plot for Mark. He had bought his burial plot next to his ex-wife using his current wife's money. The final insult, however, was a contract I found in his desk drawer. It was a renovation agreement for the Victorian house. Mark had signed it, authorizing $150,000 worth of structural work to begin in 30 days. The payment schedule relied entirely on my upcoming partnership bonus. But here was the kicker. The deed to the house wasn't in our names. I had always assumed, because I paid the mortgage, that I was on the title. I was stupid. Love makes you stupid. Mark had kept the house in a trust, the Elena Memorial Trust. The beneficiaries were Mark and his mother. I had been paying the mortgage on a house I had zero legal claim to. I was a tenant paying premium rent to my husband's shrine. I sat in my office and looked at the paperwork. I could divorce him now, fight for half the assets, and drag this out for years. But he had no assets. The trust owned the house. He was broke. If I divorced him, I'd walk away with my freedom, but he would keep the house, and he'd find another sturdy woman to pay the bills. No, that wasn't enough. I needed him to lose the one thing he valued more than me. I went home that night and played the role of the apologetic wife perfectly. I cooked his favorite meal, not roast. I poured him wine. Mark, I said softly, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. You're right. I've been selfish. Elena's art is important. We should preserve the studio. Mark's eyes lit up. You mean it? Yes, I lied. I want to pay for the renovations. In fact, I want to do more. I think we should expand the project. Let's not just fix the foundation. Let's restore the conservatory she loved so much. Let's make it a true landmark. He was ecstatic. He called his mother right there at the table. They spent the next hour fantasizing about how beautiful the shrine would look. However, I interjected, since this is such a big project, I need to focus on my work to ensure the bonus is as big as possible. I'm going to hand over the household finances to you for the next 2 months. I'll transfer the lump sum for the bills into the joint account, but you handle the contractors. You sign the work orders. You be the project manager. It's your vision after all. Mark puffed up his chest. Of course, I should have been leading this all along. I transferred 3 months' worth of mortgage and living expenses into the joint account. It was a lot of money, but it was the bait. Then, I initiated a transfer of all my personal savings, my investment portfolio, and my direct deposit into a new, secure account at a different bank. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy signing contracts. He signed the $150,000 renovation contract. He signed a $40,000 contract for the conservatory. He hired a landscape architect for $20,000. He was signing his name on every dotted line, confident that my bonus check was hitting the account on the first of the month. The contractors started work immediately. They ripped up the foundation. They tore down the back wall of the conservatory. The house became a construction zone. 2 weeks before the payments were due, Mark came to me. The first installment for the construction crew is due next Friday. That's when your bonus lands, right? Actually, I said, it's been delayed by a week. Corporate restructuring. But don't worry, it's coming. A week? He looked panicked. Tell them to wait. You're the client. Use your charm. He did. He stalled them. Then, the mortgage bill arrived. I watched him open it. He frowned. Sarah, the joint account is low. Did you forget the transfer? Oh, I must have, I said, not looking up from my book. I'll handle it tomorrow. I didn't handle it. I had stopped paying the mortgage 3 months prior, right around the time I found the trust documents. I had been intercepting the warning letters. The bank was already initiating foreclosure proceedings because the trust hadn't paid property taxes in 2 years, another bill Mark supposedly handled but ignored. The timeline was tight, but I knew the bank moves fast when a property is abandoned or in disrepair, and the house currently had no back wall. On the day my bonus was supposed to arrive, the day the contractors were demanding their money, Mark woke up to a silent house. I was gone. I hadn't just gone to work. I had moved out. My movers had come while he was at the gym the day before, taking only what I had bought before the marriage. I sat in my new apartment, a sleek, modern penthouse in the city with 0 ghosts, and waited for the phone call. It came at 9 o'clock am. Sarah, where are you? The contractor is here. He's yelling. He says the check bounced. The check bounced? I asked, feigning surprise. That's odd. You signed the check, Mark, because you said the money was there. Where is the bonus? I got the bonus, I said calmly. Then transfer it. They're threatening to sue me. They're going to put a lien on the house. I can't transfer it, Mark, I said. I used it. Used it? For what? A vacation home. For me. Just like I said I would. There was a silence so profound I could hear the contractor shouting in the background. What are you talking about? Mark whispered. You can't do this. This is fraud. No, Mark. Fraud is taking your wife's money to buy a burial plot next to your ex. Fraud is putting a house in a trust to hide it from your spouse while making her pay the mortgage. What I did was simply, stop participating. I'll sue you. He screamed. I'll take you for everything. You can try, I replied. But my forensic accountant has a very interesting file on where our marital funds went. Specifically, the transfers to your mother. If we go to court, I'll be asking for half of that back. And since you have no income, the judge will look at the trust. You know, the trust that hasn't paid property taxes in 2 years? What? Oh, you didn't know? The foreclosure notice should be arriving. Well, actually, the process server should be there any minute. I hung up. I didn't block his number immediately. I wanted to see the texts. They ranged from begging to threats to pure, incoherent rage. The fallout was spectacular. Because Mark had signed the construction contracts personally, he was personally liable. The contractors sued him immediately. He didn't have the cash, so they slapped liens on the property. But the liens didn't matter because the bank was already moving in. The trust had defaulted on the taxes and the mortgage. Since the house was now a construction site with significant damage and no funding to fix it, the bank accelerated the foreclosure. Mark tried to get his mother to bail him out, but she had spent the money he funneled to her on cruises and her own debts. They were cash poor and asset rich, but the asset was sinking. Which brings us to the auction. I showed up not because I wanted the house, but because I needed closure. I needed to see the shrine dismantled. Mark stood there with his mother, looking disheveled. He hadn't shaved in weeks. When the bidding started, he tried to shout that the house wasn't for sale, that it was a historic landmark. The bailiff had to ask him to be quiet. A developer bought it. I knew the developer. He plans to knock it down and build 4 modern luxury condos. When I delivered that final line to him, I never promised to subsidize a shrine. I walked out of the courthouse and felt lighter than I had in years. I filed for divorce the next day. Since Mark had 0 assets and significant debt from the lawsuits, and I had a watertight prenuptial agreement, the one smart thing I did before the wedding regarding my premarital assets and future earnings, the divorce was swift. Mark is currently living in his mother's 2-bedroom apartment. I heard through a mutual friend that he tried to salvage some of Elena's paintings from the studio before the bank locked him out, but because the back wall was missing and he couldn't afford the tarp to cover it, a storm ruined most of them. The damp he was so worried about finally got them, not because of nature, but because of his own arrogance. I kept my bonus. I bought that vacation home in Italy. It's beautiful. I decorated it with red furniture. I cook roasts whenever I want. And sometimes I sit on my balcony, drinking wine that I paid for, looking at a view that belongs only to me. And I thank Elena. If her ghost hadn't been so greedy, I might have stayed in that mausoleum forever. But by trying to bury me, they forced me to dig my way out, and I took the ladder with me when I left.